Count Dooku was known for many things. He was the leader of the Separatist movement, a Sith Lord, a cunning strategist, and a charismatic ideologue. But among the Jedi, Dooku was perhaps best known for being one of the greatest lightsaber duelists alive. He was the best living master for the Form 2 of lightsaber combat, Makashi, and his preference for this classic, elegant style and how easily he could use it to exploit the weaknesses of other forms was a key part of what made Dooku so legendary. Makashi wasn't just Dooku's favored form, it was the secret to his dueling skill, the thing that made him so effective. But Makashi was also part of the reason for Dooku's downfall, and in this video, we'll be discussing why. Before we begin, we're going to quickly discuss our sources. We're going to be drawing on 4 Legends books for today's video. R.A. Salvatore's novelization of Attack of the Clones, Matthew Stover's novelization of Revenge of the Sith, Labyrinth of Evil by James Luceno, and the source book The Jedi Path, written by Daniel Wallace. As always, we encourage you to buy these books and support their authors, and with that out of the way, let's begin.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
As we discussed on our character analysis video on Dooku, he was a much more complicated figure than he might at first appear. Publicly, he was once a prodigy of the Jedi Order, one of the most respected Jedi Masters, before he left the Order out of disgust for its service to the Republic, reclaimed his hereditary title as Count of Sereno, and founded the Separatist movement. As the head of state of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, Count Dooku presented himself as a political ideologue and man of principle, motivated by opposition to corruption in the Republic and devoted to building a new, better government for the galaxy. But the reality was different. Dooku had a dark side to him from the beginning, a dark side that he suppressed during his time with the Jedi, but that he later embraced after leaving the Order. He became Darth Tyrannus, a lord of the Sith, and he constructed the Separatist movement as controlled opposition, a false enemy that he and his master would use to transform the Republic into an empire ruled by the Sith. He was an ideologue, but his principles weren't what he said they were, and rather than being a champion of the ordinary people, he was an aristocrat at heart, utterly convinced of his innate superiority to everyone around him, who he saw as rabble that needed to be put in their place, namely, beneath him. While this is something Dooku had only truly embraced after becoming Darth Tyrannus, this aristocratic mindset had been part of him since his time as a Jedi. As a youngling, he believed everyone knew of his heritage and birthright, and while he suppressed those sorts of delusions as an adult, he still privately retained a sense of superiority. It certainly didn't help that the Jedi considered him a prodigy, one of their best and brightest. Although as a Jedi, Dooku would have professed that he didn't see himself as superior at all, he did look down on the people of the galaxy, albeit in a bit of a paternal way, rather than with the contempt that would dominate him as a Sith Lord. Dooku saw himself as a savior, whether consciously or not, and from that sense of superiority came arrogance, excessive self-confidence, and profound self-righteousness. Falling to the dark side pushed Dooku to embrace these aspects of his personality, becoming a deeply spiteful, self-assured, and contemptuous aristocrat, completely convinced of his own superiority, right to rule, and invincibility. All of this is key not just to understanding Dooku as a character, but also to understanding his approach to lightsaber combat. Dooku wasn't just one of the greatest lightsaber duelists of his time, a true master of his chosen form, he was also a huge lightsaber dueling snob. His favored form, Makashi, was generally considered the most elegant and artful of the 7 forms, and Dooku mastered it in part because it fit his aristocratic sensibilities well. It was a classic style built on ancient dueling principles, an old and refined form with strict rules. Dooku saw Makashi as the epitome of lightsaber combat, and he looked down on most of the other forms, even while he was still a Jedi. Dooku looked down on Shi-Cho as mindlessly simplistic, disparaged what he saw as the ridiculous acrobatics of Ataru, and as a Padawan, he even once criticized a legendary master of Niman for his sloppy form and non-existent footwork. He saw the other forms as being undignified, unrefined, fit for only the rabble, and he also looked down on any lightsaber technique that he considered unorthodox, from saber throws to using more than one lightsaber at a time. To quote A Labyrinth of Evil, "The only aspect of Grievous's technique that vexed Dooku more was the General's penchant for using 4 blades. 2 was bad enough, in the form they'd been used by Darth Maul or in Anakin Skywalker's sad attempt to employ the technique on Geonosis. But 3? What was to become of elegance and gallantry if a duelist couldn't make do with 1 blade?" Dooku's snobbery was justified, in his eyes, by the fact that he was one of the galaxy's best duelists. He could defeat just about any user of the less orthodox forms he looked down upon, and he saw this as proof not just of his own superiority, but of Makashi's. He understood the form to be one of his greatest strengths. His mastery of Makashi, he believed, was part of what made him the master duelist he was. To an extent, this was true. Dooku completely mastered the form, and he excelled at making full use of its strengths and countering its weaknesses. The strengths of Makashi and Dooku's understanding of them were the key to how effective he was in lightsaber combat, and in order to understand what made Dooku so formidable, we need to talk about the form in detail. Known as the Way of the Salamiri or the Contention form, and it was one of the oldest and rarest lightsaber combat forms. Its origins dated back to the 100-Year Darkness, a war between the Jedi and a sect of Dark Jedi that would later found the Sith Order, fought from 7000 to 6900 BBY. Form 2 was designed specifically for lightsaber combat, meant to allow the Jedi to outmaneuver and defeat their Dark Jedi foes, and it was extremely effective at that task. Over the millennia, Makashi waxed and waned. It became common during periods of war with the Sith, when Jedi could expect to have to fight lightsaber duels often, but it fell out of favor in periods of peace, since Form 2 was poorly suited to dealing with blaster-wielding assailants. By Dooku's time, it had been more than 900 years since the apparent extinction of the Sith, and so Makashi had become exceptionally rare, as it was seen as impractical. It was still taught to Padawans, however, if for no other reasons than to teach them discipline and to keep the classic style alive. Still, many Jedi only knew the basics of Form 2, something that gave Dooku an advantage during the Clone Wars, as it left his opponents unprepared to counter his style. The focus of Makashi was on precision, efficiency, and balance. Footwork was absolutely essential to the form. Makashi practitioners would keep one foot in front of the other at all times, walking as if on a line, which they would advance or retreat along as needed, keeping them balanced at all times. Form 2 avoided the use of brute strength, acrobatics, or flashy movements of any sort. Efficiency and conservation of energy were key to Makashi, requiring practitioners to be restrained and precise in their movements. Movement in Makashi was defined by sudden yet carefully calculated and well-timed charges, thrusts, and retreats, all highly economical and efficient. Form 2 stylists were known for being focused, calm, and level-headed in combat, allowing them to tear through the defenses of wilder, more aggressive opponents with cold precision. Makashi practitioners typically held their sabers one-handed, and many masters of the form favored curved hilts for better balancing. While Form 1 was defined by wide, sweeping slashes, Form 2 was characterized by tight and accurate movements that conserved energy well. Makashi blade work was defined by quick jabs, parries, light cuts, feints, and riposts, all highly fluid and precise. Slashes were short, quick, and lacked much physical force, while stabs were extremely common, unlike in Form 1. Riposts were a speciality of Form 2, allowing the practitioner to slightly redirect an opponent's attack and immediately follow up with a counterattack of their own. All told, The result was not only highly efficient, but also highly effective, especially against the users of less refined forms. On Geonosis, Obi-Wan Kenobi learned this firsthand while battling Count Dooku, as recounted in the Attack of the Clones novelization. Dooku smiled and ignited a red glowing blade. Obi-Wan stepped slowly at first, then came on in a sudden rush, his blue blade coming in hard right to left. But with only a slight movement, the red blade stabbed under the blue, then lifted up, and Obi-Wan's blade went flying harmlessly high off the mark. With a slight reversal of his wrist, Dooku stabbed straight ahead, and Obi-Wan had to throw himself backward. He brought his lightsaber across as he did, trying to parry, but Dooku had already retracted his blade by then and had settled back into perfect defensive posture. Against that posture, Obi-Wan's sudden flurry of attacks seemed exaggerated and inefficient, for Dooku defeated each, one after another, with a slight parry or dodge, seeming barely to move. For while Obi-Wan and most of the Jedi were sword fighters, Count Dooku was a fencer, following an older fighting style, one more effective against weapons like lightsabers than against projectile weapons like blasters. The Jedi on the whole had abandoned that old fighting style, considering it almost irrelevant against the enemies of the present galaxy, but Dooku had always held stubbornly to it, considering it among the highest of fighting disciplines. Now, as the battle played out between the Count and Obi-Wan, the older way showed its brilliance. Obi-Wan leapt and spun, slashing side to side, chopping and thrusting, but all of Dooku's movements seemed far more efficient. He followed a single line, front and back, his feet shifting to keep him constantly in perfect balance as he retreated and came on suddenly with devastating thrusts that had Obi-Wan stumbling backward. As with many Jedi combat styles, Makashi was primarily defense-oriented, and its efficiency created an extremely formidable defense that many lightsaber forms were largely ineffective against. Makashi defenses were built around deflecting and evading an opponent's attacks rather than engaging them directly, allowing the opponent to waste their strength while the Form 2 practitioner conserved theirs. Avoiding disarmament was also a key focus of Form 2, and something Makashi was quite useful for. But Makashi wasn't strictly defensive, and some of its best defensive techniques involved disorienting the opponent by suddenly going on the offensive, as described in the Attack of the Clones novelization. Obi-Wan watched in admiration as Anakin worked the two blades in perfect harmony, spinning them over and about with blinding speed and precision. And he watched with similar feelings the working of Count Dooku's red lightsaber, flashing ahead and back with equal precision, picking off attack after attack, and even countering once or twice to interrupt the flow of Anakin's barrage. Obi-Wan's heart leapt in hope as Anakin charged forward suddenly, bringing his green blade over his shoulders and across at the Count, but Dooku retracted impossibly fast, and Anakin's down-cutting green blade hit nothing but air. Dooku stabbed straight ahead, intercepting the blue blade. The Count's hand worked up inside and over, then back around with a sudden twist, launching the blue lightsaber from Anakin's grasp. Dooku went on the offensive immediately, driving the surprised and off-balance Anakin back. Anakin fought hard to regain his fighting posture, but Dooku was relentless, thrusting repeatedly, keeping the young Padawans stumbling backward. The Makashi offense, on the other hand, was highly unpredictable. It was precise, yet aggressive, but still restrained enough that the duelist didn't overextend themselves. Form 2 users focused on rapidly penetrating an opponent's defenses to end the battle quickly, which was typically done through one of two marks of contact. The first, Sun Gem, involved quickly and efficiently disarming the opponent, either by dislodging their weapons with a quick twist, as Dooku did to Anakin in the previous quote, or by slicing off some of the opponent's fingers or part of their weapon. The other Makashi mark of contact, Shiak, could be used as a killing blow, a quick, precise stab to the opponent's heart, but it could also constitute a quick stab or slash to another part of the body for a less fatal finish, as Dooku did to Obi-Wan on Geonosis. To again quote Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan pressed forward more forcefully, but Dooku continued to fend off the strikes, and then his momentum played out. He was too far forward, while Dooku remained in perfect balance, ready for a counterstrike. And then it was Dooku suddenly pressing the attack, his red blade stabbing and retracting so quickly that most of Obi-Wan's cutting parries hit nothing but air. Obi-Wan had to jump back, and then back again and again as those thrusts moved ever closer to hitting home. Dooku stepped forward suddenly, stabbing low for Obi-Wan's thigh. Down went the blue blade to intercept, but to Obi-Wan's horror, Dooku retracted his weapon and thrust it right back out, up and high across the other way. Obi-Wan couldn't get his weapon back to block, nor could he slide back fast enough. Dooku's red blade stabbed hard into his left shoulder, and as he lurched back, Dooku retracted the blade and stabbed along its original course, digging into Obi-Wan's right thigh. Makashi's strengths were numerous and particularly effective in lightsaber combat, from its efficiency and precision to its balance and carefully calculated movements. In a one-on-one lightsaber duel, a Form 2 master could defeat a master of many other forms, and there was no lightsaber form that served as a hard counter to Makashi except in their most advanced styles. The strengths of the form are plenty evident from the novel passages we've already quoted, but Makashi had weaknesses as well, which all but the greatest of Form 2's stylists struggled to overcome. For starters, Makashi was designed for use against a single opponent, which caused Form 2 stylists to struggle when facing multiple opponents at once, breaking their focus and forcing them to compromise on the precision and efficiency of the form. Similarly, Makashi was designed for lightsaber duels, and it was pretty terrible for intercepting blaster bolts, giving blaster-wielding enemies far too much of a chance against a Form 2 stylist. Neither of these weaknesses was insurmountable, but it took a true master of Makashi, such as Count Dooku, to be able to handle them. The form's inefficiency at deflecting blaster bolts could be overcome with raw force skill, while its struggles against multiple opponents could be dealt with in a variety of ways. Count Dooku was skilled enough to be able to maintain focus and form against multiple opponents, but as he demonstrated on Geonosis, he generally preferred to fight his enemies one at a time anyway, and he would often start a fight by picking off one opponent before focusing on another. Asajj Ventress, another Makashi duelist, used 2 lightsabers to be better equipped to handle multiple opponents. But Makashi's biggest weakness was the form's lack of kinetic power. It neglected physical strength in favor of precision and efficiency, and while this wasn't a problem most of the time, it could be fatal in some cases. Form 2 stylists lacked the raw strength to break through the strongest Form 3 defenses, for example, and they also lacked the strength to be able to maintain a defense against the raw power of Form 5's Gem-So variant. But Count Dooku was skilled enough that he was able to overcome this weakness most of the time. He overcame unrefined brute strength attacks through riposts, redirection, and simply stepping aside rather than attempting a direct defense, and only the greatest defensive fighters could create a defense that Count Dooku couldn't penetrate. In practice, very few duelists ever managed to best Dooku or even fight him to a draw, something that he took great pride in. In fact, Dooku's combat skill was part of the key to his whole sense of superiority. He prided himself as being a great fencer, the master of the most refined of the classical forms, more befitting a duelist of an older age than one of a current era. Makashi wasn't just Dooku's chosen style, it was a part of his personality. Qui-Gon Jinn, his own apprentice, once described him as being a fencer at heart, seeing life through the lens of a traditional Makashi duel. His mastery of Makashi and how it enabled him to win against virtually any opponent played a major role in fueling his own self-assured sense of invincibility especially when it came to dealing with Jedi opponents. Perhaps nowhere did Dooku demonstrate this extraordinary overconfidence more clearly than at the start of his final lightsaber duel, fought in the General's quarters on the Invisible Hand above Coruscant. This was a battle he went into knowing that he was going to lose. Darth Sidious had ordered him to lose, after all. As he had been led to believe, his objectives for the duel were to kill Obi-Wan Kenobi in order to bait Anakin Skywalker into falling into the dark side, after which he would allow Skywalker to defeat him and take him into custody. This would allow Sidious to corrupt him to the dark side, leading to the final stages of the Sith's plan to destroy the Jedi Order, following which Dooku believed he would be released from prison and allowed to rule the new galactic empire at his master's side, with Skywalker serving as their enforcer. He firmly believed that, in the end, he would share in Sidious's absolute rule over the galaxy, but in order to get there, he needed to swallow his pride and allow himself to be defeated. But despite accepting this, Dooku went into the duel with as much pride as ever, with smug confidence in his superiority over Anakin and Kenobi, firmly believing that his skill, his power, and above all his command of Makashi meant that Skywalker would only prevail because he let them. The Revenge of the Sith novelization tells this part of the story from Dooku's point of view, giving us an excellent glimpse of this arrogance. To quote, "The entrance balcony provided an appropriate angle, far above the Jedi looking down upon them, for Dooku to make final assessments before beginning the farce." Like all true farces, the coming denouement would proceed with remorseless logic from its ridiculous premise, that Dooku could ever be overcome by a mere Jedi. Any Jedi. What a pity his old friend Mace couldn't have joined them today. He had no doubt the Corran Master would have enjoyed the coming show. Dooku had always preferred an educated audience. Skywalker gave Dooku only his back, but his blade was already out and his tall, lean frame stood frozen with anticipation. So motionless, he almost seemed to shiver. Pathetic. It was an insult to call this boy a Jedi at all. Kenobi. Now, he was something else entirely. A classic of his obsolete kind. He simply stood gazing calmly up at Dooku and the super battle droids that flanked him, hands open, utterly relaxed, on his face only an expression of mild interest. Dooku derived a certain melancholy satisfaction, a pleasurably lonely contemplation of his own unrecognized greatness, from a brief reflection that Skywalker would never understand how much thought and planning, how much work Lord Sidious had invested in so hastily orchestrating his sham victory. Nor would he ever understand the artistry, the true mastery that Dooku would wield in his own defeat. But as you surely know, Dooku's enormous, all-consuming pride blinded him to the obvious truth of the situation, and as Dooku himself said, twice the pride, double the fall. As the duel on the Invisible Hand began, Dooku fought as he always had, remaining completely confident of his mastery of the situation, and at first, his confidence seemed to be validated. Skywalker came at him with wild, aggressive Xi'an and Ataru moves, much as he had on Geonosis, while Kenobi remained steady and methodical, relying on Ataru and Shicho. Dooku's mastery of Makashi made it extraordinarily easy for him to match both, even while fighting the two Jedi at the same time, just as Dooku had expected it would. Everything proceeded exactly as Dooku predicted. In fact, it went even better, as Kenobi and Skywalker kept stumbling over one another, playing directly to the strengths of the Makashi style, and allowing themselves to be repeatedly outmaneuvered. To quote Revenge of the Sith again, Dooku neatly sidestepped, cutting at the boy's leg, yet Skywalker's blade met the cut as he passed, and he managed to sweep his blade behind his head to slap aside the casual thrust Dooku aimed at the back of his neck, but his clumsy charge had put him in Kenobi's path, so that the Jedi Master had to force roll over his partner's head, directly at Dooku's upraised blade. Kenobi drove a slash at the scarlet blade while he pivoted in the air, and again Dooku sidestepped so that now it was Kenobi in Skywalker's way. Really? Dooku said, this is pathetic. Oh, they were certainly energetic enough, leaping and whirling, raining blows almost at random, cutting chairs to pieces and force hurling them in every conceivable direction, while Dooku continued, in his gracefully methodical way, to outmaneuver them so thoroughly it was all he could do to keep from laughing out loud. As Dooku predicted, he had the mastery of the duel. Once again, his command of Makashi allowed him to completely outclass his Jedi opponents in lightsaber combat, and he scarcely had to fear for his own safety. Kenobi and Skywalker were playing right into his hands until they weren't. To quote again, he leaned into a thrust at Kenobi's gut. The Jedi Master deflected with a rising parry, bringing them chest to chest, blades flaring, locked together in a handbreadth from each other's throats. Your moves are too slow, Kenobi. Too predictable. You'll have to do better. Kenobi's response to this friendly word was to regard him with a twinkle of gentle amusement in his eye. Very well then, the Jedi said, and shot straight upward over Dooku's head, so fast it seemed he'd vanished. And in the space where Kenobi's chest had been was now only the blue lightning of Skywalker's blade driving straight for Dooku's heart. Only a desperate whirl to one side made what would have been a smoking hole in his chest into a line of scorch through his armor-weave cloak. Dooku thought, what? He threw himself spinning up and away from the two Jedi to land on the situation table, disengaging for a moment to recover his composure. That had been entirely too close. But by the time his boots touched down, Kenobi was there to meet him, blade weaving through a defensive velocity so bewilderingly fast that Dooku dared not even try a strike. He threw a feint toward Kenobi's face, then dropped and spun in a reverse ankle sweep. But not only did Kenobi easily overlap this attack, Dooku nearly lost his own foot to a slash from Skywalker, who had again come out of nowhere and now carved through the table so that it collapsed under Dooku's weight and dumped the Sith Lord unceremoniously to the floor. This was not in the plan. In his overconfidence, Dooku had allowed himself to be baited. Skywalker and Kenobi had started out playing to his strengths on purpose, making Dooku think he was in control of the situation, flailing over themselves on purpose so that Dooku wouldn't expect the true threat until it was too late. They began fighting with the forms they were actually masters of, and their coordination and skill was far more than Dooku had bargained for. For Dooku, the situation was made much worse by the specific forms the two Jedi used, which made Dooku's Makashi style into a weakness. As we mentioned earlier, the fundamental weakness of Makashi was its lack of kinetic force, which inhibited its defensive abilities against an extreme offense-oriented style, and its offensive abilities against an extreme defense-oriented style. Dooku was enough of a Makashi master that, most of the time, this weakness didn't come into play, and he was able to overcome both of them. In time, his growing arrogance and strict devotion to Makashi led him to no longer see opponents using those styles as a potential threat. He believed his skill and the superiority of his form would allow him to overcome any opponent, no matter how strong or defensive. But a master of such techniques could prey upon the weaknesses of Makashi in a way that not even Dooku could overcome, as he learned firsthand above Coruscant. To quote the novelization again, the first overhand chop of Skywalker's blade slid off Dooku's instinctive guard. The second bent Dooku's wrist. The third flash of blue forced Dooku's scarlet blade so far to the inside that his own lightsaber scorched his shoulder, and Dooku was forced to give ground. Dooku felt himself blanch. Where had this come from? Skywalker came on, mechanically inexorable, impossibly powerful, a destroyer droid with a lightsaber. Each step a blow, and each blow a step. Dooku backed away as fast as he dared. Skywalker stayed right on top of him. Dooku's breath went short and hard. He no longer tried to block Skywalker's strikes, but only to guide them slanting away. He couldn't meet Skywalker strength to strength. Not only did the boy wield tremendous reserves of force energy, but his sheer physical power was astonishing. And only then did Dooku understand he'd been suckered. Skywalker's Shien-ready stance had been a ruse, as had his Ataru gymnastics. The boy was a Gemso stylist, and as fine a one as Dooku had ever seen. His own elegant Makashi simply did not generate the kinetic power to meet Gemso head to head, especially not while also defending against a second attacker. In the 3 years since Geonosis, Anakin had mastered Gemso specifically because it was an effective counter to Makashi, and in his last battle with Dooku, the raw power of his form overcame the elegance of Dooku's. In spite of Dooku's disdain for the more aggressive, power-focused styles of lightsaber combat, he found that he was unable to stand against a master of such a form, and he was forced to recalculate. As his confidence started to turn to desperation, he decided to return to his original mission, to focus on killing Kenobi so that he could focus on Skywalker. But as the following passage describes, that wouldn't be so easy either. Kenobi's master had been Qui-Gon Jinn, Dooku's own Padawan. Dooku had fenced Qui-Gon thousands of times, and he knew every weakness of the Ataru form with its ridiculous acrobatics. He drove a series of flashing thrusts toward Kenobi's legs to draw the Jedi Master into a flipping overhead leap so that Dooku could burn through his spine from kidneys to shoulder blades. And this image, this plan was so clear in Dooku's mind that he almost failed to notice Kenobi met every one of his thrusts without so much as moving his feet, staying perfectly centered, perfectly balanced, blade never moving a millimeter more than was necessary, deflecting without effort, riposting with flickering stripes and stabs swifter than the tongue of a Garolian ghost viper. And when Dooku felt Skywalker regain his feet and stride once more toward his back, he finally registered the source of that blinding defensive velocity Kenobi had used a moment ago. And only then, belatedly, did he understand that Kenobi's Ataru and Shi-Cho had been ploys as well. Kenobi had become a master of Sarisu. Dooku found himself having a sudden, unexpected, overpowering, and entirely distressing bad feeling about this. Unlike Skywalker, Kenobi hadn't focused on Sarisu specifically to counter Dooku's Makashi. In the chaos of the Clone Wars, it was much more broadly useful. But Kenobi had become Form 3's greatest master, able to produce a defense that not even the legendary Count Dooku could penetrate. Skywalker and Kenobi's chosen forms exploited Makashi's lack of kinetic power from both angles, and with their exceptional coordination, the two Jedi were also able to exploit Makashi's weaknesses against multiple opponents as well. Even as Makashi had been Dooku's greatest strength in so many battles, and even as it allowed him to overcome so many opponents, it was Dooku's reliance on the form that was ultimately his downfall in this battle. His arrogant commitment to what he saw as the most refined and inherently superior fighting method left him with weaknesses. Weaknesses that, in his last battle, his enemies exploited to great effect. Just as Makashi had led Dooku to greatness, it had also led him to his doom. As the tide turned in the general's quarters of the Invisible Hand, Dooku found that his farce had turned deadly serious, and that the two Jedi he had so easily bested just 3 years before, who he had written off entirely at the start of their battle, just might be able to beat him. Of course, Dooku wasn't out of the fight just yet. Even as he became increasingly desperate, he was able to take Kenobi out of the picture, allowing him to focus entirely on Skywalker. This freed him of one of Makashi's weaknesses, its struggles against multiple opponents, but Dooku still had no luck in dealing with Anakin's aggressive Gemso style. Previously, Dooku had nothing but contempt for Skywalker. He didn't know what Sidious saw in him, and Dooku was jealous of how much both Sidious and the Jedi fixated on the boy and his talents. The thought of losing to him on purpose was enough of a blow to his pride, but Dooku soon found himself having to come to grips with the fact that he might lose to him for real. To quote the Revenge of the Sith novelization, he dusted himself off and fixed a supercilious gaze on Skywalker, who now stood upon the balcony looking down at him, and Dooku couldn't hold the stare. He found this reversal of their original positions oddly unsettling. There was something troublingly appropriate about it. Seeing Skywalker standing where Dooku himself had stood only moments ago, it was as though he was trying to remember a dream he'd never actually had. In the end, Count Dooku's smug superiority, his sense of invincibility, and his unshakable confidence in his own skills all proved misguided. His elegant Makashi proved ineffective against the raw, unrefined power of Anakin Skywalker. Dooku was outmaneuvered, overpowered, and disarmed. And as he kneeled at Skywalker's mercy, he realized, belatedly, that he had not only overestimated his skill in lightsaber combat, but his overall importance as well. Darth Tyrannus believed that he was the axis around which the galaxy spun, but in his last moments, he realized that he had been just another pawn. To quote Revenge of the Sith, as he looks up into the eyes of Anakin Skywalker for the final time, Count Dooku knows that he has been deceived not just today, but for many, many years. That he has never been the true apprentice, that he has never been the heir to the power of the Sith. He's only been a tool. His whole life, all his victories, all his struggles, all his heritage, all his principles and his sacrifices, everything he's done, everything he owns, everything he's been, all his dreams and grand vision for the future empire and the army of Sith have been only a pathetic sham, because all of them, all of him, add up only to this. He has existed only for this. To be the victim of Anakin Skywalker's first cold-blooded murder. First, but not, he knows, the last. So, that was our look at the Makashi form, and how it was both the greatest strength and greatest weakness of its most accomplished master. But what do you think? Would you like to see more Dooku content in the future? Let us know your thoughts about Makashi in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.